Good afternoon. I could almost say good evening at this stage, but thank you very much for so many of you staying on for this final session on the importance of groundwater. My name is Patrick Wall. I'm the Scientific Policy Manager at Eurogeo Surveys, and I'm not an expert in groundwater, so I'll be very brief in this session and I'll leave the talking to the experts. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Klaus Hinsby. Klaus is a senior scientist and researcher in hydrology at GEUS, the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland. He is also the former chairperson and current deputy chair of the EGS Water Resources Expert Group. Klaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. And for me also, thank you to all of you still being here. We just saw a couple of examples of some serious water-related issues in Europe that we have all over Europe. And actually, according to a very new paper, Earth is now outside the safe operating space for humanity in 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, now including freshwater change. And typically, as Julie also mentioned earlier, when we are talking about freshwater, people think about rivers and lakes, etc. But actually, 99% of the accessible liquid freshwater on Earth is beneath our feet, is in the subsurface in groundwater. And so this is, of course, very important. So I guess I'm pressing this one. Yes. Planetary boundaries was mentioned earlier today, but maybe not all of you are familiar with this concept. It was introduced back in 2009 by Rockström and al. And it's in a paper by around 30 earth scientists from around the globe. And they defined these 9 boundaries that we need to be within to be in a safe operating space for humanity. And already at that time, they defined the 3 which we already had transgressed, namely climate change and biodiversity loss and the nitrogen cycle. So in 2015, these were revisited by more or less the same research group. And now additional breach of these boundaries was found in the land system change. Land system in this context is primarily the deforestation of the large forest in, for instance, in Amazonas. So at that time, that was also breached. So now, just about a month ago, there was another update of the planetary boundaries. And this time, they defined 6 out of these 9 boundaries that has been transgressed. This time, also the freshwater change. And they split it up in green and blue. Blue water is groundwater and surface water, river streams, while the green is water in the root zone. It's water for the plants. Both of them are now transgressed. And then also the novel entities, and that is very much related also to water issues. And we have we haven't heard about that. Not also in this video we just saw, there was mentioned pesticides, etc., and nitrate. But PFAS is one of these novel entities that we now find all over the world, in the Arctic, in groundwater, everywhere, and that put pressures on the quality of the groundwater resources. So we have a lot of different challenges out there, and they are all more or less connected in some way in very complex ways that we need to understand. So, as I also mentioned, groundwater is not always visible to people that are not working on groundwater. And actually, for the first time, groundwater was the main topic of the World Water Development Report last year in 2022. With the title make groundwater visible, or the invisible visible. And here, as you can see, it also states that 99% of our liquid fresh water is from groundwater. And there are also some, here you see two important statements in relation to what we are doing. So the vast potential of groundwater and the need to manage it sustainably can no longer be overlooked. It is essential that countries commit themselves to developing an adequate and effective framework for groundwater governance. And groundwater data collected with public funds should be freely accessible. So this is what we are trying hard to do with the providing data for the EGDI in the GSEU, now and previously in the GeoERA program. There was another important report last year, the Essential Drop to Net Zero, Unpacking Freshwater's Role in Climate Change Mitigation, a report led by the Stockholm International Water Institute and co-authored by the Potsdam Climate Change Research Institute and a few other institutes. But this is, again, a report that is clearly demonstrating that there's close relation between freshwater and climate change mitigation, and more or less all of the activities that we can come up with to reduce climate change impacts have freshwater involved in one way or another. So this is also demonstrated in this slide, the resources, society, nature nexus, and it comes out to the left. You see the natural resources that we have been discussing a lot today. So it's the mineral, raw materials, water, soils, and geoenergy. And all of these have been, of course, extremely important for developing our modern society. Necessary for developing, and will continue to be. But they always also, as we know, the abstraction and exploitation of the resources put severe pressure on the planet and the planetary boundaries. And all of these, I mean, the resources, society, nature, nexus, more or less also relate to all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that is actually what I have for, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for those introductory words. So I would like to introduce our next speaker now. Professor Marco Petita. Marco is a professor in hydrogeology at Sapienza University of Rome. He is also the vice president of the International Association of Hydrogeologists and an esteemed member of the scientific advisory board of the GSEU project. Welcome, Marco.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. And I just show you an overview of a project just ended under the PRIMA program. The PRIMA program is one of the Horizon program dedicated to research, and in detail, this is dedicated to the area of agriculture, water, and food in the Mediterranean area, so including also the Northern African countries and also the Middle East on the Mediterranean basin. I don't have to underline, also Klaus did, the relevance of the groundwater resources to the geologist. And what about the stakeholders and the general public, policymaker? now they also are aware of the relevance of groundwater resources in the water cycle, thanks to the UNESCO World Water Day in 2022. So under this framework, we developed the research on the karst aquifer in the Mediterranean area with the aim to not only to have some research results, but also to disseminate the results and to have contact with the stakeholders and some public engagement, like GSEU and like also GeoERA are doing in this period. So just an overview, so you can go to the website karmaproject.org to have additional information on. Yeah. It seems. Yeah. So the idea of the project is to take into account climate change and the land use change, which affecting the water cycle in terms of decreasing recharge, increasing water demand, and of course affecting groundwater quality and water quality. So there is a direct impact on groundwater resources from these drivers, and we followed a multi-scale approach, selecting information on single karst springs at the catchment scale, and at the end, upscaling to the entire Mediterranean area. These are the partners of the project, so Italian, France, and Spanish, Tunisian, Lebanon, and Germany, including the BRGR, which was another partner of the project. And what we performed with time is a research assessment. Of course, how many water is infiltrating into the soil by different methods in different areas, and just an overview, and say you that what we found is that we have more than 50% of recharge in the aquifer respect to the rainfall in several areas by climatic data elaboration. But we also apply some geological-based methods like APLES, developed by the Spanish colleague, and we discovered that in karst area we can reach higher rate of recharge, close to 75%, which is very good news. But at the same time, this percentage is affected by not only precipitation change, but mainly by the temperature change, because in highest peak, where the snow was spreading and stay for several months, now this cover is disappearing, especially in the Mediterranean area. We also perform a review of the tracer test in karst environment. That data from more than 100 tracer tests, and were collected. Some additional tracer tests has been done in several sites of the project, and so this data are of course available on the website, and under request you can have also information, more detailed information. We perform some spring discharge monitoring by direct measurement, tracer dilution, velocity field measurement, and we obtained by this monitoring important input parameter for modeling and for groundwater quality assessment. What about water quality monitoring? Long-term monitoring was already in place at several test sites, also after the end of the project. And we perform analysis of several parameters by continuous on-site measurement. This is related to the idea to establish some early warning system in some case in karst springs. You know, the karst springs are very huge in terms of discharge frequently, but at the same time they are very vulnerable to external events. So we performed some, we installed some early warning system or pre-early warning system in some sites, which are now available in Spain, Germany, and Lebanon. The following work package was dedicated to modeling. So we model and classify the karst hydrodynamic by hydrochemical responses, and several approach were taken into account for modeling, including the neural network. At the end, we arrived to classify in 6 groups the springs respect to their response to the input, the karst, which include, of course, an evaluation of the karst maturity of the aquifer. Yep. Yes, by lumped modeling, we arrived to some classifications. So we have some high variability springs due to the evolution of the cast, moderate variability of the hydrological functioning, very inertial, a steady state hydrological functioning. You can understand easily the relevance of these results in terms of management of groundwater resource. And many of these springs are tapped for drinking purposes, mainly for drinking purpose. And one of the direct projects at the end at the scale of the Mediterranean basin is the new map of the karst aquifer and a data collected in correlated database, which is available at the same time. I have a few printed copy of the map, so who is interested in having can collect directly here, or you can write to me and we can send you the link, and at the same time you can find on the website, and also the printed copy if necessary. What is the content of this karst map is also, no need. Sorry, can you close the window? Close the window. Okay, we have many areas affected by depleting of groundwater resources. We also evaluated area irrigated by groundwater and population density and the abstraction. So we are not only evaluating the depleting of the recharge, but also the pressure in terms of withdrawal at the scale of the basin, of the Mediterranean basin. Another important topic is a karst groundwater dependent ecosystem. So we concentrated part of the effort not only of the human needs, but also on the environmental preservation. And we collected more than 100, so about 120 karst GDA have been selected on the basis of the level of protection and the status of the groundwater resource in the same area. This is enough from my side. You can understand that such a project is an element that can contribute to the knowledge and to the transfer of the knowledge to the stakeholders in concrete action. And I see a very strong correlation also with the GSEU activity on the groundwater package. So we are absolutely in agreement to share information with all interested people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. And thanks for highlighting those links between the Karma and GSEU project. I'll move swiftly on to our next speaker. So Philippe Quevaux-Villet, I hope I got it right. Philippe is a research programming officer with DG Home in the European Commission, but he might be better known as the father of the Groundwater Directive.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Well, in fact, I've been invited yesterday to just replace someone, so I feel like a hair in the soup here, just trying to adapt, and I hope that you will understand the framework of what I will explain, which is, in a way, a paradox between what I've learned 20 years ago about groundwater quality and quantity, and what I'm facing now about water security. And I will try to maybe, I think, yeah, I hope that I will. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I wanted to just highlight the framework in which I'm working now in research programming in the security sector, which is also dealing with security. And I'm called Mr. Disaster, you know, because I'm looking more at natural hazards and accidental hazards, including intentional threats, that is terrorism, which is also affecting water resources. And in this way, we are trying, obviously, since many years, to establish networks of upstream actors, research community, and downstream practitioners. In this case, I will just recall that we have a very complex policy framework, which is not only dealing with environmental matters, but also issues related to civil protection, accidental issues, Seveso, and so on. And that this is, at international level, embedded into the Sendai Framework for Action, the UN Convention. I don't think that you are really faced with this convention which is more related to disaster, but I will explain you why I'm coming to this, because in Europe, in the Union, this is ruled by the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, which is looking at natural hazards, that is environment and climate adaptation strategy, health threats, cross-border threats to health, non-intentional hazards and intentional hazards. And this is coming to the issue which is binding by law. Well, the EU directive which are dealing with, for example, extreme drought or floods, flash floods and so on, are ruled by the Water Framework Directive and Flood Directive. And the threats to security, water security, are being looked at by the Drinking Water Directive and indirectly to the Groundwater Directive. So the Groundwater Directive, groundwater resources, are actually a little bit central also to this concern related water. We have a decision related to cross-border threats to health, which is also, in terms of pathogens, biotoxins, relevant. Regarding non-intentional threats, we have the Seveso 3 directive, which is looking at accidental hazards, which can have an effect also on groundwater pollution. And regarding intentional threats, we have an action plan, which is dealing with chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive threats. And this is not binding by law for a simple reason, is that the security aspects regarding the threats are under the sovereignty on the states. So here you have a panorama of policies which are either binding by law to the member states. They have to implement the directives, Water Framework Directive, groundwater, drinking water, Seveso, and issues which are recommendations established by the Commission, but which are not binding by law. So this is actually the framework in which I will come to highlight the role of research here. We have a certain number of projects which are looking at issues related to water resources, water quality, water quantity, and water security. I will come back to this. And I immediately say that we are in Horizon Europe dealing with, I'm working in cluster 3, that is security. Cluster 6 is looking at agricultural and food. Cluster 1 on medical issues, health threat. Here, when you are dealing with groundwater security in cluster 6, they will speak about lack of resources. Security for them will mean lack of water resources. When you are speaking to me about water security now, I will tell you this is intentional degradation, a criminal act or a terrorist act. So we are already using the same term for two things which are different. We have a certain number of networks. We have working groups. I remember this, the former working group C, which has been, for me, a tremendous adventure because I've been working with the old folks. You know, Klaus is due to him that I'm here, because otherwise I would have strongly hesitated. So he was working with me 20 years ago. And we have also some networks that are related to different issues and links with SMEs and industry to look at uptake of tools and technologies. And this is related to a wide range of impacts that water resources might embed, that is societal resilience, integrated risk management, it's also water risk management, standardization, and first responders, which is a little bit less concerned. But here, well, let's speak about safety and security. You know very well what it means regarding the Water Framework Directive and the Groundwater Directive. Groundwater Directive is setting the quantitative status and the chemical status. This is clear. We have objectives there which are related to a certain number of substances. I heard from my successor that there is a revision of substances which are regulated. And security, well, you might say that safety is quality, security is quantity, lack of resources. But when we are doing, and this is quite clear regarding the binding requirement, member states have to implement the Water Framework Directive and Groundwater Directive. It is by law, and this is embedded into national law. So the Commission is looking at this. Regarding security in the context of the, I would say, intentional threat, here we have threats which may be related to drinking water, but also groundwater resources. A terrorist or criminal could get a way to poison resources, and this is a criminal act or terrorist act, which is embedded into security. In this case, we have indeed a certain number of recommendations, but it's not binding by law because member states are sovereign regarding the security aspects. So here, the paradox is that we have research dealing with water safety planning, which is clear, linked to the Drinking Water Directive, water safety planning. And we have research looking at water security planning. So if I'm a criminal, if I'm a terrorist, I will know exactly where to put the poison zinc. I will not go downstream, nor at the treatment plant. I will go in the distribution network. And the distribution network are set with the Drinking Water Directive to monitor the substances which are related to, well, drinkability, to the drinking water parameters. These network sensors are not at all set to monitor the substances which are prone to poisoning, criminal and terrorist act. So we are in a very tricky situation where when we are asking to the member states, and I did that at the French Senate in December, they asked me, but what to do? Water security plan, you cannot implement that because there is no EU law. How can we deal with that? And as a French Senate, I say, become federal. It's as simple as that. It's very simple, response. I know that it is far from being the case now, but the only way to look at this issue at EU level is to indeed regulate, in fact, this issue regarding the monitoring of substances which are prone to criminal act. So it's just, I wanted just to highlight this. I don't know if it's prone to this of network here today, but it's my main concern now to try to see how the Commission can provide actually clear recommendation regarding this both security. Because even when I speak to my DG Agri colleagues about security, they are speaking about this. They are not speaking about this. When I'm speaking to my home colleagues about internal affairs, migration, internal affairs, they are speaking about this, not about this. Well, the climate people are speaking more about drought and lack of resources. So you see that I don't know how you can deal with this from the geological background, but this is something which we will need to look at very, very seriously in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Philippe. Maybe if you can stay, Philippe, on the panel. And I would like to invite our previous speakers and panelists to the stage now. So in addition to our speakers, we have two gentlemen who you heard from this morning, Peter van der Keur from GEUS and Chris Piesens from Geological Survey of Belgium. Can we get some microphones for the panel, please? So, Philippe, thanks again for providing that policy context and security issues around groundwater. I'll maybe kick off with a question to the panel, and then we can open up to the floor. But I would like to start by coming back to this morning, where we saw a little snapshot of what's going on within the GSEU project in terms of groundwater research activities and actions. So stakeholder engagement is quite an important part of this project as well. And today was a lot about getting our stakeholders up to speed and getting some interaction and networking going on with them. But in terms of the groundwater aspects of the project, so this is maybe more in the realm for those involved directly in the project, but it might be interesting to get some external opinions as well. Where do you think we require stronger involvement with our stakeholders? Because what we're working on, we're producing a lot of data and information and harmonizing it and so on and so forth. But it needs to be fit for purpose. So what aspects of the groundwater component do you think are most important and really require that interaction and feedback from our stakeholders?
Well, maybe I can start. Maybe it was clear from my presentation this morning was that on the aspects of groundwater quantity and quality, that there is has been anticipated to be based on the available data and the monitoring sites we have identified, to also do a forecasting. And the forecasting is very important to anticipate trends in groundwater quantity, so with respect to drought, but also flooding, and also with respect to what is happening in trends in groundwater quality based on drivers and pressures we have identified. So this actually will require a new kind of interaction with end users and stakeholders to anticipate. So because now this information will become available on trends that detected for groundwater quantity, so based on groundwater levels, but also groundwater quality, and how to do this, because it is important to anticipate that this information will become available, and we need to use it somehow to react and to in a timely and effective manner. So this is a new kind of interaction with stakeholders, you may say.
Yeah. And if I may add to this, I think in this process, actually EGDI is a very important instrument, the possibility of really exhibiting the data we have available, and then we can develop also with stakeholders and other people that we are collaborating with also in other Horizon programs and projects. So we together can continue developing EGDI to be a very much stronger tool. And what I see also as a very strong, what is the English word? The strength of EGDI is the possibility of actually combining different map views. So you can combine groundwater quality issues that are related to fault systems in Europe, or to geothermal areas in Europe, etc. You can do that within seconds on EGDI. So this is a very strong tool also for the collaboration with our stakeholders.
Yes, groundwater people are used to interact with stakeholders since a long time, with community and so on. Every time we are drilling a well, every time we are tapping a spring, we have to interact with stakeholders and local government, and also the citizen too. What we need is additional information, of course, but at the same time, we have to simplify. This morning, other people talk about the simplification of the communication with the stakeholders and policymakers. But at the same time, we have to simplify without banalizing. So we have to take into account the fact that the problem is complex, and we need a lot of data information to be shared and to provide useful solution. This is the main point to be improved in the communication with stakeholders, in my opinion.
Well, I will simply say something which is dating from 20 years. You know, I'm a great fan of geological surveys for one reason. When I started the work of groundwater directive setting, you know, the principle, I was coming from research, because I'm a geologist and an oceanographer, researcher by background. So arriving in the legal framework was not easy. And I had 5 or 6 pillars, and well, at my left, there is one of them. 2 or 3 of them were from geological surveys. And they were actually helping me a lot to clarify actually the legal framework when I arrived. And the issues that I saw when I arrived at DG Environment is that the water framework directive had been adopted 2 years after. There were nearly no links with research. I was coming from research. And what I did, and Klaus can testify this, I put actually a research trend into the directive development. And involving the geological surveys. And the net result of that, you speak about stakeholders, the net result of that is that when we discussed the text for adoption at the Parliament, the scientific background coming from geological surveys was very strong. So there were experts working for MEPs that did not have actually this background in terms of data and knowledge that we had to convince the Parliament and Council that this was the right structure for the groundwater. So for me, you are, in fact, in a position where you may, towards policy stakeholders, have a political strength and a political say.
Thanks a lot. That's, I mean, very wide coverage of the question, but Chris, you didn't come in there, and I might pick up on you in particular on this because the interaction of geological surveys with other institutes is also very important, and we heard earlier in other sessions about subsurface spatial planning and the need to take into account a whole range of data, and we've seen a lot of different topics today. So maybe you might come in there on the spatial planning part and what kind of information is important from the groundwater perspective.
Yeah, well, thanks for raising the topic. It's also a topic that you can do a whole GSEU day on. So I'll try and be very short here and maybe highlight something. I wasn't in yesterday's discussion, so I will talk from my own experience and background. One thing that you need to realize when you talk about subsurface management is that you've got a lot of asymmetries there. So groundwater, for example, is an activity that's more susceptible than average to other activities. So they can be influenced by other activities in subsurface, while the impact of groundwater itself on the other activities may be negligible. And that in itself makes it quite challenging to come to an overall global view on how to manage the subsurface. And also, what do you want to do with it? We've seen this Niels, I think it was, who showed that nice diagram. How do you want to exploit your subsurface? Do you want to maximize the amount of activities there, pack it as full as possible, or do you want to make it sustainable, last for several generations to come? These are tough choices to make, and these are the choices that we will be asked to make will also vary in very short time. I mean, in 5 years' time, the view may be different. There's a new war in Europe, the view will be different. And all of these things, together with geological uncertainties, makes that a very tough topic to tackle. But I must say that, and one where you really have to listen to, for example, stakeholders, but groundwater plays a very essential role in there. Not only because it's sensitive, but also because it's one of the resources that is most tightly linked to the surface itself, to diversity, biodiversity, to our use, etc. And that is a very direct link, and it's a very good example, I think, to use and to have as a central piece when we talk about subsurface management.
Would anybody else like to come in on that? Otherwise, I'll open to the floor. No. Any questions from the audience? Getting tired, I guess. We have one. Gerardo.
Well, this is not about raw materials, okay, the question. But since I'm a scientist, maybe it's out of the blue, this question, but it's the end of the day, so maybe I can be more, you know. I have a curiosity, okay, regarding, I was listening very much the presentations and this issue about water security. I understand that this is about the possibility of terrorist acts and these things. So my question has nothing to do with that, but about groundwater security, because Klaus was saying 99% of the water we are using is from the groundwater, no? So do we know how much groundwater do we have in Europe or in the world? And what is the forecast for this groundwater to be ended? I don't know. I'm just this curiosity. Are you having these numbers, or are you?
That was actually part of the previous project, the GeoEura program, where we had 4 groundwater projects. One of them called Resource, and in the Resource project, they initiated the development of estimating the volumes available in each of the member states of those who were involved. Unfortunately, not everybody was involved in this activity, but there's actually you were in Spain, so there are, and of course we had to. I think yesterday we had a paper coming out from what we did in Denmark in relation to that, because we have an integrated groundwater surface water model at a resolution of 100 times 100 meters for Denmark, and we had to scale that up to 10 times 10 kilometer. And of course, you lose a lot of geological information in that. For instance, the buried valleys that we have all over Denmark. But we kept the information on the volume of the resources available. And that is what we can use this map for, what we developed in, and which is accessible on EGDI.
So do we have this kind of big number? What is the volume of the groundwater resource in Denmark or in Europe?
I don't have that in my head, no.
Because my next question would be, how long are we going to, for how long do we have this groundwater, you know, because we are depleting, no? We are.
Well, and you know, and in Spain you have specific challenges on that, and you have worked on, I know you have worked yourself on that, on using satellite measurements of what happens when we lower the groundwater table. So there are huge challenges on this.
Can I add something? Yeah. The peculiarity of groundwater resources is the renewable rate. So they are partly renewable. The huge amount of groundwater reserve stored in the ground, also deep, are a very huge amount. The renewable resources are a limited one. And we have to take into account this. And respect to the past knowledge, which was dedicated to the amount of the recharge every year, so the renewable rate on a specific area or aquifers and so on. Now the new challenge is the distribution in time and space of this renewable rate. Because we know very well that with climate change, we have a change not only in the amount, but especially in the availability in different seasons and so on. And in this framework, for example, we are losing, as I mentioned before, the contribution from the snow. The snow in the Mediterranean basin is lowering and lowering, and this is a strong contribution. In my study area, in the Karma project, we established that we expect, based on the IPCC scenario, only for temperature rise, not change in rainfall, we expect from 5 to 14 depletion of the renewable rate. But for snow contribution is close to 50%. The expected depletion of the recharge or the annual recharge. 50, yeah. The rain is very close to zero, but the effect on the recharge is changing respect to the temperature. So the temperature is the main driver.
I could be talking for.
Yes, thank you for the question on the water security. And maybe I can add with respect to what we're actually doing in the GSEU project on groundwater resources. Is that as I mentioned, based on the data we have, and some of the data are real-time data. So the groundwater levels are monitored on a real-time basis, and from that we can do predictions. And so water resources, water security is also a question of anticipating what is happening based on those trends, and to implement measures that can combat, for instance, drought and also worsening groundwater quality, also based on what we know and how we see the trends develop. So this is a very important contribution, as I see it, for water security on these two levels.
Thanks. Maybe just one last comment from the audience because time is against us, sorry. So, Robert.
Yeah, very short question. Last days we were talking about H2, about renewable energy resources. Do we have any number how this would impact on the water supply, or is this just unknown? I have no idea, so I really have no idea. If we develop H2 as an energy resource, how would this impact on water supply, drinking water supply?
Very short and clear, we do not know yet. So that's definitely something to look into, yeah, in collaboration.
And in general, if you start asking that kind of questions, we don't know. And we do have the first project starting up, including, for example, subsurface management and all these interactions that we're talking about, which includes also the surface. And it becomes, we're still working on what kind of methodology we're going to use to answer those questions, because it's not just finding some data and finding some literature and bring that together. We have to go way more at much more fundamental level to answer that kind of questions. But we do have some projects that we're looking into that I'm involved in, but they're not at European level at the moment.
Thanks. So I think we're going to have to wrap up, but I'd like to just pose final question to the panel, and if you can answer it as briefly as possible, maybe a couple of words. But just in terms, we heard a bit earlier about the policy context from Philippe. And in terms of the Water Framework Directive and its implementation and the wider goals of the European Green Deal, what do you think is the most critical issue to be addressed in relation to these legislative acts in the coming decade? And do you see any knowledge or research gaps that really need to be addressed to face these challenges?
Well, we are pushing for research programming in extreme drought and extreme floods, because we know that here we have something to do, not only in prevention and preparedness, but also in response. So when you speak about groundwater, stakeholders, we need to have the full spectrum of knowledge provider down to the people who will be reacting to the crisis. So here, our main concern about water security, here I speak about lack of resources or too much water in case of flash floods, is really to look at this better preparedness and response. We are not really looking seriously about intentional poisoning. We have some, for the reason I expressed above, because member states are interested by research, but they don't take up the research output. So it's a little bit paradoxical.
And if I may add something on then groundwater quality, I agree with Philippe on this part, and I think the important point is that we got the Water Framework Directive in 2000, and we had the objective of obtaining good status for all water bodies in Europe by 2027. We will definitely not meet that goal. And I think still one of the quality parameters most frequently causing poor status in Europe is nitrate. And we have still a huge challenge bringing that down, and it's not going that well. So that will definitely also be something we need to work on for the next 10 years.
A real bottleneck, in my opinion, is analytical analysis of emerging contaminants. The emerging contaminant list is growing every day. There's hundreds now of emerging contaminant or emergent contaminant at this stage, and this would be very difficult and costly to have a complete analysis of this for environmental issue or for health issue. So there is some new research activity dedicated to identify some indicators. And of course, indicators is not really the solution, but bioassay and bioindicator can be a solution for assessing the stress of the microorganisms, so we can evaluate the stress on the environment and in general of microorganisms. This is a real challenge, in my opinion.
I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to answer it because we have some really good directives and some acts being put into place currently, or that have been put into place. And when I talk to my government, they are worried. And they know they have work for at least 10, 15 years on the shelf to actually digest that and to put that into action in their own country. And that's what my first focus at this moment. So, sorry, a good question, but I don't have an answer to it.
Policy support, I guess.
I can just add that in the last State of the Environment report of the Environmental Agency, European Environment Agency, you can see some nice table where you can see the legislation, which is obligatory, mandatory for member states, and also you can see that some of the UN SDGs, specifically the SDG 6, of course, but also there's also a link to other SDGs, is voluntary, and maybe the time has come soon that some of these UN SDGs may also become mandatory.
And I have the last word of the day, I believe. So, but before I say just a very few things, first I wanted to say thank you to the EuroGeosurvey Secretariat staff for all of their support in making a great day, and particularly to Francesco for organising the day, bringing in some great speakers and guests. And finally, just a few things that I've taken away from today. Our first GSEU day and exploring our ambition for a sustainable geological service for Europe. A few things that I can see are required and that we're working on and still lie ahead of us. First of all, the technical, scientific base, the data, information and knowledge that we need, the expert network that we need, the understanding that we need to fill the gaps between our national data and knowledge and bring that together into harmonised European scale data. The communication we need to focus on why our data, information and knowledge is required to support and implement good policy, and also the need to extend our network to our users and other data providers, to industry and to policymakers. For me, Sally Payne earlier today articulated very well one particular aspect, was that the future sustainability of our geological service for Europe depends on our ability to identify and find the resources to fill the gaps in the data itself, the gaps in our ability to maintain and deliver and produce pan-European data and knowledge and information, and the gaps in our ability to communicate the policy relevance of what we're doing and the impact to decision makers. But having said all of that and knowing that there's a lot ahead of us, I do find it extremely positive that there's a real motivation within and beyond our network to collaborate. And that's really what EuroGeosurveys is all about, and it's what a geological service is about as well. Thank you very much for your input today.